I'm really pleased to welcome back to the show my next guest, author and podcaster Charlie Robinson. Charlie, how you doing?
I'm doing great, all things considered. It's quite an extraordinary time in our history, one that will be examined and re-examined for the next couple of decades. It's fascinating to, it's frustrating to be living through it, but it's also, if we're objective about it, it's also a fascinating time to be alive.
You're right. And you know, Charlie, for the past several days, almost every single guest of the show, and frankly, basically any person I speak to, which is normally happening telephonically now that we've been basically prohibited by gubernatorial edict from interacting with people, friends, even family, almost every single person answers that question with the same caveat that you gave. I'm doing pretty good, all things considered. And it's quite a bit to consider. For people, Charlie, who perhaps are seeing you for the first time, you are the author of the book, The Octopus of Global Control, and we've spoken about it several times in the past on this show. Your latest endeavor is the podcast known as Macroaggressions, and people can get that on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, basically everywhere podcasts are cast. But it's important that people search for macroaggressions with an A, and you're going to get better results if you add Charlie Robinson to the search, because just in trying to listen to it, I came across so many social justice references to microaggressions and how people can navigate their way around that stuff. Charlie's also got a YouTube channel.
My name was of the podcast was designed to make those people insane, of course, and to poke fun at them for their microaggressions and how concerned they are with all of, everybody has wronged them and slighted them. So it is me, having a little bit of fun at their expense with the name. And listen, I'll tell you right now, Jason, I'm #1 in Malaysia and Pakistan.
That's good.
So you know. Yeah.
That is an interesting thing. I mean, listen, you can joke about it, but that's pretty good. It's difficult to get these sorts of things off the ground, Charlie. I mean, I've only been doing this for about 3 years, and I've had a lot of resistance. Charlie's also got a YouTube channel for the podcast, Macroaggressions with Charlie Robinson. I hope that people will subscribe. We can help Charlie get to 2,000. I will say the first 1,000, in my experience, is the most difficult hurdle to get over. And I think we set something incorrectly for our simulcast, because it looks like there are still people here waiting for it to begin. But this video will be available after the broadcast on Charlie's channel as well. You did a great podcast just the other day, Charlie, about eugenics, this depopulation agenda, Margaret Sanger, the advent of Planned Parenthood, and the connections to Bill Gates and various other people. I wanted to have you on today so we could expand on this a little bit and talk about what you're seeing with regard to the advent of this coronavirus pandemic, all the talk we've heard in social media and on the mainstream news about the possibility of mandated vaccines, possibly even the government forcibly injecting, as Alan Dershowitz said. We've now got East German Stasi-style checkpoints set up in New York City, preventing people from entering or exiting to places like New Jersey, Long Island. It's absolutely crazy, Charlie. What do you think?
Well, it takes, you think about the David Icke totalitarian tiptoe. That's how I think. It's just incremental. It's not everything happening all at once. It's just a little here and a little there. Maybe you kind of let that slide, or you don't think that's too big of a deal. And after a while, you've gotten so far away from where you started, you look back and think, wow, everything's changed, and I didn't even recognize it. And so as far as the depopulation agenda / topic goes, the first time people hear about that, it is really easy to dismiss it. I completely understand how people would say, get out of here with that. You sound insane when you're talking about this stuff. So I do understand that. In fact, if it were the first time it was brought to my attention, I probably had the same reaction. But I would encourage people to just stick with it a little bit, because this isn't me talking about what I think their depopulation agenda is. I don't need to speculate about it. They write about it. They're very forthcoming. They're very upfront about who they are, how they see the world, what they feel the problems are, and then how to deal with those problems. And part of the problem that they see, when I say they, I mean the people at the top, people running the government, the people above them, the elite, let's call it, just for the lack of a better term, they see the rest of us as taking up space and screwing up their world. And when you have that sort of mentality that this is our place and you guys don't belong here, then it's easy to be dismissive of those people. It's easy to try and they work very hard to try and make these people go away. They set up organizations that talk about this openly. They write books about it. They teach college classes. I mean, they're involved in the government. Obama brought in John P. Holdren to be the science czar, and John Holdren is a psychopath of the highest order. I mean, he writes books about how what we need to do is have lotteries to see if to force sterilize everybody with implantable devices, and then have everybody has to enter a lottery system to be chosen to see who can then have their device removed so that they can reproduce. And that they're talking about maybe they would have a marketplace for this. Like, oh my God, could you imagine Goldman Sachs in charge of
Wow.
determining, what you're going, who gets to reproduce and who doesn't? And John Holdren is not, this isn't some guy that got drunk at a cocktail party and started blabbing about how he wants half the world dead. Like, he's talking about it in books. He wrote the book Ecoscience in 1977, talking about the same thing.
Whoa.
So it's a long-term plan. This isn't something that they've recently come into. And he was put in charge of I mean, if you're Obama and you're picking all your czars, which was weird to begin with, but you're picking all these people. You can't go find somebody else besides John Holdren, the guy who's a eugenicist, talking about how we need to thin out the herd. It just seems like the wrong person to put in charge of the science. Frankly, it seems like the wrong person to put in charge of anything, but especially the science. And these guys are given platforms and treated seriously, like they're talking about real things. And what happens is that, is that these policies, these potential restructuring of society is now it's being taught in colleges by other professors that believe in this and that write books about it as well, and they teach kids, and then the kids go out into the world and they have like they're like, God, we got to get rid of we've got overpopulation issues, we've got this, we've got to worry about. All this stuff is manufactured. I read something that said if you took every single human being on the planet and put them in one place and made them stand next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, they would take up as much space as the city of Jacksonville, Florida. Now,
Everybody on Earth?
Everybody on Earth standing shoulder to shoulder. Obviously, you can't live that way, but just to, so this idea that we're running out of space, it's not. It's not true. Have you driven through Texas? I mean, there's plenty of space.
Yeah.
It's real big. So it's not about actually there being too many people on the planet, or how are we going to feed everybody, or how are we going to clothe everybody. It's that these technocratic maniacs have decided that they don't, because the technology has advanced to the point where it is now, there's really not a need for a whole percentage of the human race to be on this planet as far as they see it, because they don't add anything. They take up space.
Oh, you mean robots and automation and stuff could take over?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Charlie. This particular guy, he looks to me like he could be the czar of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Why is he able to I mean, this plan of putting something into people, if I understood correctly, because you did mention this on the podcast, he wants to literally put something in every person at birth that prevents a natural function of your body, that is reproduction with a member of the opposite sex. And then they're going to chemically re-enable this for people who qualify according to their factors, whatever that is. No way there could be any medical side effects of something like that, right?
No, never. This is what they talk about. They're role playing this. So let me I'll read you a quote from his book Ecoscience in 1977. The development of a long-term sterilizing capsule that could be implanted under the skin and removed when pregnancy is desired opens additional possibilities for coercive fertility control. The capsule could be implanted at puberty and might be removable with official permission for a
Wow.
limited number of births.
Wow.
So he's talking about the government. I mean, Joseph Mengelev gave the book 5 stars, which I thought was nice of him.
What?
But
No, come on. That's
no,
a joke by somebody.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is. Here's a list of some of the things from his book. Women could be forced to abort their pregnancies, whether they wanted to or not. The population at large could be sterilized by infertility drugs intentionally put into the nation's drinking water or in food. He talks about this as a suggestion.
Wow.
He mentions that single mothers and teen mothers should have their babies seized from them against their will and given away to other couples to raise.
What?
And he says people who, quote, contribute to social deterioration, i.e. the undesirables, can be required by law to exercise reproductive responsibility. In other words, be compelled to have abortions or be sterilized. And lastly, he talks about a transnational planetary regime should assume control of the global economy and also dictate the most intimate details of Americans' lives using an armed international police force. Okay, now,
Wow.
this guy's out of his mind. And this is 1977. So while everyone else is at Studio 54, coked out of their brains, John P. Holdren is busy in his workshop thinking up new and experimental ways to make sure that the planet doesn't have any more people on it. So this is a really alarming thing. And like I said, if this was just some guy who always wants to talk to you every time you go into the local bar, that would be one thing. But
it sounds like a plan from Ming the Merciless or something like that. He's going to, rule over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. But that just gives you an idea of the mentality. That's sort of where their thinking is. It's like, well, we should decide whether or not all these people should be able to get pregnant and have kids and everything. And so this is it's eugenics at its core. It's nothing new. These guys didn't invent it. They're just sort of taking on the next level of this. And where you and I have had these conversations in the past year or so about Epstein, right. People might think, well, this, one of these and the other doesn't have much in common. But I would remind people that Harvard professor of mathematics, Martin Nowak, was given $30 million by Jeffrey Epstein in order to start a program for evolutionary dynamics. This is the study of population structures, evolutionary economics, and evolutionary game theory. So they're talking about the same sorts of unusual things that John Holdren and Eric Pianka and these guys that are talking about, what we're going to look like, what the world will look like in the next couple of generations, because if we do, with regard to population control and who is allowed to reproduce, and then we throw in this newer version of the technocratic blueprint for humanity when I think we've all probably have seen the Bill Gates presentation where he's doing a TED talk talking about vaccines. And if we do a really good job with our vaccination program, we can lower that number, meaning total population of the earth, by about 10 to 15%. So I ask people, if we do a really good job with our vaccination program, we can lower the number? Doesn't he mean we can raise the number? Right? If we do a good job with our vaccines, everyone should be healthier. Therefore, that number, meaning total population, should theoretically go up. That's not what he says. He says it should go down. So I'm not sure. Well, I am sure, but he's talking about doing a good job with their vaccination program equals 1 billion fewer people on the planet. So you have to ask yourself, what is he talking about? What kind of vaccination program? And then you dig into the World Health Organization and you find that they've been busted putting sterilants in the tetanus vaccines in Kenya. They denied it at first, but then they later went back and admitted that it was true and that it had been going on for a decade. So we've got what we've got for the casual observer is this belief that vaccines equal safety and health and improve humanity. But that's not how these people see the vaccine programs. They see it much differently.
Yeah. Now, I just want to take you back for a second to John P. Holdren, because
Oh, please.
I mean, I personally support free speech to the extreme. You know, people are free to say the most bizarre, crazy. I mean, Louis Farrakhan should have a platform. If Hitler were alive, give him a YouTube channel. If this guy wants to come out and say that he thinks that people should be sterilized, he has a right to say that, and people have a right to listen to that. And my hope is that ideas rise and fall in the marketplace of free ideas. And most people would find this guy to be a very objectionable and, as you said, arguably psychopathic individual who thinks that any government body has the right to do that. The bigger problem for me is that Barack Obama should have read that book from 1977, or at least spoken to somebody who did, before he appointed this guy in any kind of official presidential advisory capacity. It's also important for people to remember Barack Obama's greatest, probably the greatest legacy of his presidency. Let me ask, what do you think it is?
Well, I mean, one of the thing that jumps out the most to you is that he's the first African-American president of the United States.
But in terms of things that he did, Obamacare, it's got his name. Everybody remembers that.
Yeah.
And people associate that somehow. There's a lot of people out there who want socialism right now, Charlie, and they want the government to pay for their health care. They feel like, that's their God-given right to have health care. Doesn't really make sense to me, because why isn't it your God-given right to have access to food, or your God-given right to have a safe home? It would seem like those two things are the first step in good health. If you don't have clean home with running water and toilet, you're going to be laying in your own filth, exposed to disease, etc., malnutrition, dirty water. So it's weird how they've gerrymandered this concept of complex, expensive Western medical intervention as somebody's God-given right, and they've weaponized it psychologically and physically, and we seem to be in that deeply right now.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed about this, taking into account the current situation that we're in, where when you turn on the nightly news, you hear about, well, once the vaccine is done, then things will go back to normal.
Right.
Or, all of this stuff. It's not going, I mean, I don't know that it is going back to normal. I think that one of the things that you would hope to hear from the mainstream media, if they were being honest and objective and they were trying to genuinely educate people, what they would be saying is, once we get a vaccine, everything will go back to normal, ... But in the interim, eat healthy, exercise, get lots of sunlight, take vitamins. I haven't heard any of that. I haven't heard the media talk about any of those things, any of those free options, any of those things that will boost your immune system and put you in a better situation to prevent this from. I haven't heard one single thing about that.
Quit smoking, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. Hey, maybe don't be 300 pounds. Maybe watch your health. These things put you in a category that makes you susceptible to the coronavirus
and other diseases.
And other diseases. Do your best to make yourself less susceptible, and by improving on these 5 or 6 things that you can do. But we don't hear that. We only hear about the vaccine is the only option when it comes. And so to the casual consumer of the nightly news, they might assume that that's the only option available to them. But I would remind them that the news in the United States gets about 60% of their ad revenue from big pharma. So they're not in a position, they're not really in a huge hurry to try and tell you how to avoid big pharma, because they need them to continue advertising on their, so they manufacture, I mean, they pretend as if the only solution is the vaccine. And it's not a matter of whether or not you're going to take it. It's, do you take 1 dose, 2, 3? Is it like the flu shot where you got to get it yearly or whatever? And so it's skewing. It's like giving you a multiple choice test, but they're not giving you all the possible answers. And you're like, I would like another couple answers here. I'd like the answer, which is I'm not getting the vaccine, or I'm going to improve my own health, or I'm not in an age category where I'm really at risk. Maybe we should open things back up. So it's, I mean, you and I you and I've talked about this at length. I can't stand the mainstream corporate media because they're so disingenuous. And they actively work against the American public. It's a shame because people feel like they're getting lied to. They go online then to try and dig around and find out, well, is there truth to this? Could hydrochloroquine actually work? I don't know. Let's dig into it. And then the conversations about that are silenced, removed from YouTube, buried in, Twitter and Facebook results and things like that. And so there's manipulation. So I ask, why would there be manipulation if we're just having a discussion about how we can cure ourselves or help ourselves out or improve our immunity? Why is there an unbelievable rush to silence anybody that is saying anything opposite of the official narrative?
Yeah.
And I see you've got a picture up of the doctors. The doctors are a prime example of that. You've got they're coming forward saying, listen, there is another option here. We're just talking to you about a potential option that you may or may not want to use, but we're going to make you aware of it. And they silence them and get them fired and try to marginalize them. Yeah, I know the lady's talking about demon sperm and everything. It's kind of crazy, but
I didn't hear that.
The African lady, the lady that mentioned she was from Africa, she's got a bit of a questionable sort of other job going on where she's talking about the role of incubus and succubus and things like that coming into you in dreams.
But this concept of
awful.
free speech, Charlie, it's coming up in the chat right now. Somebody I haven't seen before, Silent Cat 15, is upset that I said that Hitler should have a YouTube channel. I'm just saying we cannot say, oh, well, I don't like Nazism. My relatives, my descendants were murdered and fled Europe because Hitler was a terrible guy, so we should suppress Nazism. I'm saying air it out. Let people hear it and let people decide for themselves, because that's the only way we're going to overcome these kind of ideas. Trying to suppress them, I mean, that is what somebody like Hitler would do. And also, if I want Charlie Robinson to have free speech, and I want to have free speech, and I want each of these doctors to have free speech, we cannot get into selectively assigning our morality to whoever or whatever. I mean, just like this guy who wants to Norplant everybody at birth and then decide who gets to have babies, Silent Cat doesn't get it. Hate speech is free speech. So Silent Cat, I'm going to ask you to STFU, because even though I dislike what you're saying and disagree with you, you're allowed to say it. You're just wrong, and you're exposing that you're a fool. Hate speech is free speech, and just because you hate it, somebody else might love it. And I might say, this is interesting, Charlie. The main Jason Goodman Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel has just been given a strike for hate speech. So according to Silent Cat 15, or whatever this alleged person's name is, I am equal to Hitler, because we wanted to do an investigation into a topic that YouTube has determined is hate speech. Now, what if YouTube, like Ford was, like Union Bank of Switzerland was, what if they're aligned with Hitler and they think his speech is okay, but my speech against him is hate speech because I hate the people of Germany, according to them. So I'm just saying everybody needs to have free speech, or else nobody has it.
It's better if everybody has free speech, including the people that you don't want to have free speech, because if they are being ridiculous, then they will expose themselves as the ridiculous people that they are the more they talk. So I would say let them talk. Let them talk. The more that the God hates fags people at the Westboro Baptist Church keep talking.
Oh God, you're just going to get me now removed from YouTube for saying that.
Oh, sorry. In the context of, at the Westboro Baptist Church, old with the signs and everything, everybody is laughing at them.
Right.
Except marketing professors. They're probably teaching that in marketing school. They're like, that's how you market. It's crazy. Gets people's attention. They get an A+ in marketing, but their message is ridiculous. But what would happen though, if you said, we got to silence those people? What it would do sort of subconsciously is validate them. It'd be like, ooh, somebody thinks they're so dangerous that they can't even be allowed to talk. So I am of the opinion, like you, which is everybody needs the platform. even the ridiculous people, even the hateful people, even the people that are saying everybody's going to hell if they do this or that, and just allow everybody to, allow the market to speak. If there's a marketplace for their ideas, then people will find them and listen to it. If they're really that out of touch with reality, then they will be broadcasting to nobody. But to let unelected, to allow technocrats to make that decision is a slippery slope where yeah, you're getting dinged for hate speech and you're saying, well, but I'm not doing anything hateful. And it's like, oh, it's not about actual hate speech. It's about the speech that we hate, so it's
exactly.
And that becomes like, well, who's the arbiter of that? And that might be one thing if we're discussing Hitler speeches or something like that. But what about medical? What about this discussion about medical service, the practicality of this rushed vaccine? I mean, if ever there was a conversation that needs to take place in the town hall to kind of get all sides of this would be it. But when you start to see that there are interests involved in this that don't want all sides to have a voice, they want certain people to be silenced. They want, the Del Bigtrees, Sherry Tenpennies of the world to not have a platform to talk about the things that they want. You have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because they're really crazy, out of their mind conspiracy theorists? Or is it because they're a direct threat to somebody else's business model? And I think that, of course, is what it is. Business model / agenda, because it's beyond just making money at this point. Big Pharma makes a lot of money, but there are people above them that see this as a great opportunity to thin the herd. And the censoring of speech is going to play a real role in this, because I think as we get closer to the first version of this vaccine that everyone seems to think is going to be the miracle cure, right? That's going to come in and magically make everybody able to go back to the way it used to be. There's going to be side effects. There's going to be questions about it. There's going to be people with legitimate concerns and some real factual information to back up their argument against it. And my suspicion is that those people will be silenced in advance so that they're not there to throw up problems against this. So I would expect the likes of Dell and Dr. Tenpenny to be, to be gone, to be removed in some purge that has yet to happen or is, currently underway, because it's as crazy as Alex Jones can be, he was right when he named his show InfoWars, because it is an information war. And if we don't, if people don't believe that, just look what's happening in social media. They are selectively enforcing what information is allowed to grace their platforms and what gets you kicked off for good.
Now,
myself.
You've been kicked off for good. From Twitter or what?
I was kicked off of Twitter once. Yeah, now I'm back for jokingly suggesting that we throw Bill Gates into a volcano. But clearly I was kidding, but they said it was an incitement to group violence. It's like, but that hypocrisy
technically
makes
they've got an argument there when you say somebody should have violence done against them. I agree, it's comedy, and it's interesting how they selectively choose. Here's the important thing that we need to get into, because we've got this extremely disruptive person who I really want to leave, and I'm not going to do anything that they suggest. Anytime, this is my advice for people to accept or reject, but if you're dealing with somebody who is upset with you and you tell them to chill out, that is a stupid strategy. That is a horrible strategy. And in my case, it just makes me more angry. So here we've got somebody who is disrupting the chat with their idiotic opinion. Now, just as, Charlie, you or I could run a restaurant or a bar, that's a private business. It's open to the public. We invite people to come in. But if someone is acting in a way that is disrupting the other customers, even if they're within the context of the law and the Constitution, you, as the owner of the private business, have the right to reject service to that person on the basis that they're upsetting you, upsetting other customers for whatever reason you choose. Now, if you do that in an indiscriminate way that other customers find objectionable, it's likely to cause your business to fail and you'll be done. But simply telling someone like this idiot cat to go away and shut up and stop commenting, and even if I block that person and prevent them from commenting here, I'm not blocking their ability to utilize free speech. I'm just telling them they're being disruptive to the conversation and they should go exercise their right to free speech elsewhere because they're not wanted here. Their opinion is irksome and I'd like them to leave. I don't care if they're a sponsor. I don't care if they're a sponsor for $1,000 a month. When somebody pisses me off, they're called out and they're told to leave. And this person is going to get blocked right now, Charlie. Tell us some more, if you could, about Margaret Sanger, the depopulation agenda. I know you wrote about this in your book, The Octopus of Global Control, which I hope that people will purchase. It's worth mentioning that they can get a digital version of it by making a donation via PayPal. Tell us all about the Octopus of Global Control, and then let's get into Margaret Sanger and the depopulation agenda.
Yeah. So one of the things, so how about a mashup of these two things? Because one of the things that we've been talking about lately has been how insane, like, the colleges have become, how they're allowing safe spaces and, and timeout rooms and all these things. And you've got this kind of leftist agenda. I'm not on the left or the right, but it seems that there's this unusual leftist agenda going on in colleges and universities, and it's churning out a bunch of kids. And then they go out into the world. They have these sort of ideas that were instilled in them in colleges, and they go about their life thinking that, that sets part of the way they see the world and believe, the world should be. So taking a look at these, at a guy like Dr. Eric Pianka from the University of Texas, evolutionary ecologist. This guy is a teacher at UT in Austin. And this is one of the quotes that he said: "War and famine would not do. Instead, disease offered the most efficient and fastest way to kill the billions that must soon die if the population crisis is to be solved. AIDS is not an efficient killer because it is too slow. My favorite candidate for eliminating 90% of the world's population is airborne Ebola because it is both highly lethal and kills in days instead of years. We've got airborne diseases with 90% mortality in humans killing humans. Think about that. The bird flu's good too. For everyone who survives, he will have to bury 9. So this guy is teaching your kids at the University of Texas, Austin. He's teaching them this. So you've got that sort of, so that is a philosophy that is being pushed out into the schools. And then we hear a lot about Planned Parenthood. And you go, well, Planned Parenthood is where, they've got discounted women's reproductive health services and things like that. It's great for people that can't really afford healthcare. Women that can't really afford healthcare can go in there and get things sorted out. They can get pregnancy tests or they can get abortions and things like, there's a variety of things, but it's that abortion thing. And I don't want to turn this into an abortion debate, but it's important for people to realize that Planned Parenthood was started by Margaret Sanger. And some of the things that she has said in the past are quite alarming. Things like eugenic sterilization is an urgent need. We must prevent multiplication of this bad stock. She said things like the most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it.
How could someone say that in public? I mean, the people that you're pointing out are absolute psychopaths. And, as an example of an actually productive comment, the type of thing we're looking for, regular viewer has contacted me saying this Harvard math professor who you mentioned, Nowak, is the same professor who indoctrinated this individual's son at Harvard about not having children. I also want to remind our viewers, and I'm not sure if you have followed the shows we've done about the Weather Underground, the radical movement that came out of the Students for a Democratic Society in the 1960s and 70s. But Bernadine Dorn, who was the leader of that, she issued an audio-taped manifesto to a radio station in which she said, guard your children, guard your schools, guard your airplanes. So she was laying out the mechanisms that they intended to use to attack. It's my personal belief that the Weather Underground, or disciples of them, had something to do with 9/11. And that might sound crazy to people, but part of the reason I believe that is that the New York Times on September 11th ran this article about the co-founder or the co-leader or whatever he is of the Weather Underground, current husband of Bernadine Dorn, Bill Ayers. And in the article, which was in the September 11th, 2001 newspaper, which I do believe, Charlie, is edited and printed well before 8:46 a.m., Bill Ayers says he has no regret for a love of explosions. He doesn't regret setting off bombs, and he feels we didn't do enough. This is on newsstands just minutes before essentially the biggest bombs any of us have ever seen go off, changed our lives for the first time in my lifetime, and now here we are at a second event, at least as earth-shattering as 9/11, if not more so. What do you see in the world ahead? You're a dad, you've got a young child. What are your thoughts, Charlie?
I mean, I'd like to be optimistic, but I don't. Well, first of all, I've been very disappointed with the general public's response to this. I feel like, there's a vast majority of people are still asleep at the wheel. They blindly listen to their government. They listen to their media. They do what they're told. Like on the one hand, it's great to be a respectful person who is like polite and thinks of others and all this, but you've got to kind of take some responsibility for your own actions. You've got to be responsible for getting your own information. If you're leaving this up to the nightly news, you're at a severe disadvantage for the rest of the population that's digging into this, because I cannot understand how people can blindly put their faith in the mainstream media, big pharma, and politicians when they have been busted lying to us on countless occasions. It's like they're pathological. And so I feel like, on the one hand, not everybody, people are going to work, trying to go do their daily routine. They're trying to get up, get their kids to school and go to work and pay their bills. And they're bogged down with all this stuff. And maybe they don't have the time to dig deep into the research of the vaccines, or maybe it doesn't apply to them. They don't have kids that are getting vaccinated, whatever. There's a variety of reasons for people to not be involved in this or to not know anything more than just the surface area. But boy, it's really important that people kind of wake up to this. And yes, I'm critical of the media and I'm critical of big pharma and the government, but I'm also critical of the general public too. Like, we have a responsibility. We have a stake in this. Like, you're not allowed, you don't have the luxury of outsourcing your critical thinking to others anymore, because those others that are doing the thinking for you, they cannot be trusted. You're going to have to get involved. You're going to have to understand what's happening. When you look at people like, when you say, well, Bill Gates, who's Bill Gates? And the casual observer says, well, he's the nerdy, Microsoft guy who's got $100 billion and everything. It's like, okay, that is part of who he is. What's his background? Why are we believing him? Who is his father? His father took over Planned Parenthood for Margaret Sanger. And I'd like to read another quote that Margaret Sanger had that I put in my book. We do not want, this is from 1939 in a letter she wrote to Dr. Clarence Gamble. She said, we do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population.
Jeez.
Oops. Well, it's out. And let me tell you who has something to say about that. Here's a quote as well. I'll tell you who said it at the end. Now, I have to tell you that it was a great privilege when I was told that I would receive this award. I admire Margaret Sanger enormously, her courage, her tenacity, her vision. And when I think about what she did all those years ago in Brooklyn, taking on archetypes, taking on attitudes and accusations flowing from all directions, I am really in awe of her. Hillary Clinton.
Exactly.
Okay, so Hillary Clinton's the president of the Margaret Sanger fan club. And Margaret Sanger doesn't want you to know that she's actually trying to exterminate the Negro population. So we've got people in positions of high power that see the world differently than us. Hillary Clinton, if it were up to her, God knows you and Charles Ortel have done 400 plus hours of on-camera work about her. I mean, nobody needs to explain that she's a psychopath, but there are a lot of people like her. There are a lot of people that take that same sort of approach. And And so you look at Margaret Sanger, you find out who she is, you realize she formed Planned Parenthood. You look at William Gates Sr., Bill Gates' dad, who took over for her. You've got to make the assumption that they have similarities in philosophies. Obviously, you don't take on that role unless you see things in a similar way. So is it surprising that William Gates Sr. would go on to have Bill Gates, his son, and instill some of these values, that maybe the earth is too populated, that maybe there's certain groups that should be, prominent and others that should go away? I mean, it's reasonable to assume that. Now, Bill Gates doesn't get up on TED Talks and talk about getting rid of the Negro population, but he does talk about using vaccines to lower the population. And that is something that is in dispute. I mean, you cannot deny that he's talking about that. It's on camera. So it's very important for us, for the casual observer that's watching the news. You're going to have to get involved to a certain extent. You're going to have to do a little bit of research. You're going to have, before you just blindly line up at your Walmart to get the vaccine put forth by Bill Gates, it would do you good to know who Bill Gates is and what he wants and how he thinks, because they're going to do something to you that is irreversible if you take this vaccine. And it will be too late, and you will say, well, I didn't know. Well, look, you should have known. Frankly, at this point in time in 2020, if you haven't heard about vaccinations and the damages and the vaccine courts and the $4.2 billion that they've paid out, even through a rigged system that pays out maybe 1 out of 100 that really deserve it. I mean, if you aren't aware that there are issues with vaccinations, then you need to take some responsibility for your life and wake up to this, because it's going to be the issue of 2021 as we move into that year. God knows what that's going to look like, but it's going to be a topic of discussion, vaccines. And if you don't have some background on it, I'm not saying you have to be a virologist. You don't have to be a pediatrician and know how all of the viruses work or how the human body. I'm not saying that. Like, none of us, we're not doctors, but you do need to know.
And nothing we're saying is intended to be medical advice.
Nothing, exactly. I'm not a medical doctor, but do I have to be to understand that there is a system in place where anybody that comes up talking negatively about the vaccine industry is viciously destroyed, deplatformed, and hunted down and made to look crazy? And part of this is that there's so much money at stake for big pharma, and it's our obligation. So as much as I have a problem with all of these external organizations, these industries like big pharma trying to control our lives, I have just as much. I'm just as upset with the general public. So you asked how I view this, with having a daughter who had to end her 3rd grade by, doing it virtually. I'm scared. I'm sad.
How's her reaction been? Like, I mean, can she see her friends and stuff? Like, this is a very important developmental time, and 9 is a young child.
Well, we have made sure that she can see her friends and interact with her friends and do these things. I mean, we have made sure of that, but that's only because we're educating ourselves as to how this whole thing works. I have questions about the truthfulness of the people in positions of power like Fauci and Birx and these people, so I'm not panicking in the way, I don't have her bubble wrapped to go out in public. I mean,
but are you encountering parents, maybe friends of hers, whose parents don't want the children to interact with your child?
We haven't had that yet, but I would imagine it's out there. I mean, I know it's out there.
Some people must be dealing with that.
And it just varies based on the level of fear inside a parent. And it's hard to tell a parent, don't freak out about this, because they freak out about things all the time that are sort of smaller deals. Oh, I don't want you to go to this place because there might be, what if there's bears? Oh, you're camping. What if there's bear? I mean, it's like you can make yourself insane with, oh, I want to protect my kids so much. But this problem now is that you've got unelected bureaucrats, or you've got guys like Fauci and Bill Gates that are setting the setting the mandatory or potentially mandatory vaccination schedule for something like this. This is crazy. And I think that if people want to start their research into, big pharma and everything, start by looking at all of the times that they've been sued for products that they've put out that have literally killed people. Every single big pharma company is a convicted felon. They've all been convicted of felonies for what they've done. They've paid out billions of dollars. This is not like, oh, we made a mistake, or you get a little rash after you get a shot.
Right.
No, this is permanent in some cases. This is death in some cases. So it is really there. And I think that unfortunately, like people that are maybe a little older than us or our parents' age, they come from a time when they make the assumption
Trust the
if
government.
this was a big deal, I would have heard about it on my nightly news. If the autism epidemic was really involved with vaccines, I would have heard about it on my nightly news. Anderson Cooper would have told me all about it. But here's the thing is that, like I said earlier, they get so much of their ad revenue from big pharma, then that they can't have those honest conversations on air because Jeff Zucker will get a call from the CEO of Merck saying, get Anderson Cooper to stop talking about this stuff or I'm going to pull $1 billion worth of ads today. So, get a hold of your guy.
I don't even think they need that call. It's a foregone conclusion that something like that would obviously happen. Now, Charlie, let me propose something even more direct that people can use to sort of challenge the logic of some of this. People might say, oh, Charlie is talking about some esoteric lawsuit or some kind of nonsense. But when we consider even just last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago at this point, Dr. Fauci had this testimony before Congress, and he was asked, I've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. He was questioned by a Republican representative as to why he has come out so strongly against hydroxychloroquine. Now, I'm not a doctor, as you said, we're not giving anybody medical advice, but we have heard numerous doctors say they've used this in patients with mild symptoms or no symptoms who've had positive tests for COVID, and they've had very good outcomes. Now, granted, there's a certain subset of the population who are going to be susceptible to specific, I believe, cardiac side effects, but this is why we have doctors who meet with people individually and get to know the patient's medical history. We don't just turn on the TV and let some, government bureaucrat who might possess a medical doctor degree issue blanket directives for everybody, irrespective of their health, irrespective of their pre-existing conditions. I mean, this is not the way that medicine works. And what Fauci responded with was that this specific trial that the congressman was referring to by the Ford Clinic should be dismissed because it was not a double-blind, placebo-backed, randomized study. Now, what's very interesting is Dr. Fauci has been in his position for something like 32, 36 years, some really, really long time. He was a medical advisor during the Reagan administration when this Vaccine Injury Act, the Child Vaccine Injury Act, was passed, which has made it so that no vaccines that have come on the market since then have been subjected to double-blind, randomized, placebo-based studies. And certainly the new vaccines that they are contemplating making mandatory, he specifically eliminated the animal trials, reducing the testing. They've moved for additional legal measures to indemnify any of these pharmaceutical or biological companies that are making these things. None of this is consistent with scientific process, with medical process. So the contradictions, even in Dr. Fauci's own behavior, his own actions, that alone should give people pause. We've never had a condition where a state governor has mandated that doctors are not allowed to prescribe a 65-year-old drug that's widely used, generally accepted as having minimal side effects in a large population that it's been prescribed to over 65 years. How can we explain this other than it being a political agenda?
Well, you could explain it by it being about money, because hydrochloroquine is a generic that makes the pharmaceutical industry no money. And whereas a brand new vaccine mandated to be given to everybody, maybe multiple times, would obviously generate billions of dollars. So the fact that this is about It's about a couple of things. It's about money. It's about control. It's a psychological operation, because this is straight out of the Army a handbook for creating psychological operations, where you have somebody say one thing and then you have them say the exact opposite thing, and they're adamant about both, and it creates this cognitive dissonance in people. And you're like,
Right.
you're going, one guy's saying, wear the mask, you jerk. Don't you want to kill? You're going to kill grandma. And you're like, why are you telling me to do that? Because Fauci said it. And you're like, well, can I show you the video where Fauci says, don't wear the mask?
Where's the double-blind,
like,
randomized, placebo-based test that shows us the efficacy and safety of the masks? What about people with breathing problems? What about people with respiratory, cardiac problems? They could be hurt by the mask. It's
all a signal that what you're dealing with is not about our safety. It's not about our health. It's about something else. It's about an agenda. It's about a plan. It's about a plan that is much bigger. It is about a plan that is so important that if anybody speaks out against it, they will shut your state down. Right. They will make it so that you can't do. I mean, the response from the governors to this situation has been authoritarian and insane to me. It's led me to speculate on this, and I don't have proof of it, obviously, but I think it's worth at least thinking about. What have these governors been promised in exchange for shutting down their states? It seems to me they're all Democratic. And like I said before, I'm not on the red team or the blue team. I don't like either of them. But it seems to me that perhaps the Biden camp has promised these people something in exchange for their enthusiastic decisions to shut down cities, to shut down states in general. I mean, have they been promised secretary level positions if Biden wins? I mean, it's something to think about, because there's no rational explanation for this. Because I think that one of the things that's making people really insane is the hypocrisy of it all, where you've got one group doing one thing, one group doing the other thing. You've got politicians saying you cannot be out on the streets. And then you've got the same politician saying, well, but it's fine if you're protesting Black Lives Matter. And everyone's going, huh? What? Wait, okay. We can tell now that this is fake. But it doesn't stop. It's, I'm going to open my gym. We got to throw you out. We're going to take you. You've tried to open your gym. We're going to take you and we're going to throw you in jail because you're a bad person. While we let all of the prisoners out of jail because we don't want them to get coronavirus. And you're like, wait a second, what is going on here? This backwards system of doing things, to me, leads me to believe that they have been promised something, like they are being incentivized to keep this insanity going, because the numbers dropped and stores started opening, and they dropped the levels of closure so that it was a little bit more free, and people were starting to get back into the not normal, but they're feeling like things were getting better and better and better. And then what happened? All of a sudden it was the mask mandated, and everyone's like, but things are better. Why do we have to wear the mask now? Well, because it's a visual representation of an invisible disease, and a disease that you can't see anywhere. You look for it and you don't know where it is. You don't know if you should be scared of it because you can't see it. But if I see everybody in the grocery store wearing a mask, I know something's going on. I mean, at least my brain is telling me there's something that's unusual here. So they kept it going. They've kept it going. I've read reports that say, well, we're going to make it mandatory in these masks for kids, at least through the first 2 weeks of November. And it's like, geez, that's a specific and unusual term. You mean like right after the election? Why not the end of November? Why not the end of flu season next year? But the middle or second week of November, very interesting. Is this about the election? I mean, look, it's got to be on the table of something we discussed. That is this being manufactured to continue longer than it should because of an election? Is it to mandate this vaccine? What's going to be in the vaccine? There's a lot of questions about this. And unfortunately, if you go to the mainstream media to try and get answers to them, you'll just get jerked around even more. So it's so important for people to support alternative media, to support shows like Crowdsource the Truth. I talk about your show wherever I go because where else are you going to go? I mean, you're not getting financially incentivized to be for or against big pharma. So to you could have this conversation and be neutral on it simply because you just want to have the conversation. You think it's important. But I know the mainstream media is financially incentivized towards big pharma. So therefore, what they talk about, the things that they throw out there, it's you have to take that into consideration, that they have a financial incentive. And one more thing that nobody's thinking of, but it is very important in this current situation, is that Barack Obama passed the Smith Modernization Act of 2012, which legalized propaganda inside the United States to be used on Americans. So when you turn on your nightly news, or you open up your newspaper, if you still get one, or you go to, msnbc.com or whatever, and you're looking at the news, just remember that they took the extraordinary step of legalizing lying to you inside through propaganda. Yeah. Because they intended to use it. And this would be one of those situations where a little bit of propaganda could be used to sway popular opinion one way or the other.
I'll tell you, Charlie, the truth is there was a time where I was financially incentivized by Big Pharma when I was producing stereoscopic videos with 21st Century 3D. Before I moved out to Los Angeles, a lot of our clients here in New York were large pharmaceutical companies, and I didn't know all the things that I know now about vaccines, the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act, how much influence they have. Robert Kennedy Jr. said that in a conversation with Roger Ailes claimed that 70% of the ad revenue for Fox News was coming from Big Pharma. I guess the other 30% is probably coming from intelligence interests that they're protecting and defending with their bizarre reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, In-N-Out Burger, anything having to do with any of those guys. So there's a lot of people who are passively incentivized by this stuff. I have a friend who is in ad sales for a medical journal. And I mean, he took the job in part because he feels like this medical journal helps doctors gain information that they're using to help people. He's a good guy with a good heart. He doesn't want to mass exterminate or sterilize people. But we got into this conversation and he said, look, none of these pharmaceutical companies exert influence over our editorial content. And I just had to stop the conversation with him because he doesn't understand that without those advertisers, there would be no editorial content. So there's an unspoken influence that's there when there's a gigantic corporate sponsor where I don't think they even need to call the editor. That only happens, I would think, in an extreme case where some wild man like Charlie Robinson or Jason Goodman or any of the other guests that appear here go out on a limb and do something that they hate. They know that they can be crushed. And Charlie, this is a big part of the reason why I have created the viewer sponsorship program. Some people object to it because they want things to be free, but it's not free. When you're watching something at no cost to you on YouTube or Periscope or Facebook or wherever, that's being paid for by financial interests that support those entities, and they've got an agenda in delivering you all these free services. I've been caused, and I don't blame Vimeo for this, but I'm in a new contract with Vimeo because my usage of the live streaming video network and the number of people who want to download that content has exceeded the amount that I'm allowed to download. They give you an unlimited live streaming account, which is technically limited by the fact that there's 24 hours in a day, a limited number of days in a week, so you can only live stream so much. But as more and more people start watching, fans of The Octopus of Global Control, fans of Macroaggressions, fans of all the other shows that I have on there, it's putting more demands on these networks. And the fact that Vimeo needs me to pay a substantially huger fee moving forward is directly due to the fact that they are not owned by Google and they don't have billions of dollars behind them. And when you utilize these resources, it costs money. So by making this system where the show is directly sponsored by the viewers, I eliminate that reliance on a corporate sponsor. And you've done the same thing, Charlie. So it is important that people listen to the Macroaggressions podcast, whether they like iTunes or Google or whatever it is. They can get access to the Macroaggressions podcast in a variety of different ways. And of course, they can go to your YouTube channel. Are you on Patreon or anything like that, Charlie?
I'm not on Patreon. People that support my work do so by sharing the podcast with friends. I mean, it's free, it's out there. It's free. If people like the book, paperback is available at Amazon and barnesandnoble.com, but the digital version, people just, like you said earlier, donate $10 or more to me via PayPal. I send them 2 different formats of the book, and then I encourage them to read it, and I encourage them to share it with their friends and family. I don't care if you pass it along. I know it goes out there and I don't get paid on that, but I'd rather the information be out there. I'd rather people be talking about it. It's important. It's important where we are right now. We've got to get ourselves, I don't want to think of it as, war, but like we've got to get ourselves armed for battle and with knowledge and information. We have to be having these conversations because we can no longer allow the mainstream media to be the only source of information for us. There's a lot going on online. There's a lot of censorship going on online. And I would say that is a double-edged sword. It's a bad thing in the sense that we don't like censorship, but it's a good sign in that they feel they need to censor people because they're having an effect. Their voices and are impacting the establishment, and they don't like that. So when people are getting kicked off of social media platforms, I hate to see that, but I also acknowledge that means that they're doing something that is working because the establishment feels threatened by them, and they see something like Crowdsource the Truth, and they're not really sure how to disrupt it because it's decentralized in the sense that you're funded by individuals out there. So the only thing they can think of is, well, let's just be an individual, get in the chat and start being disruptive that way. But you've set up a really smart system that decentralizes the financial power into the hands of individuals, which is great. So, like you said earlier, if you're getting something for free on a social media platform or a video platform, well, then the product is probably you. They're taking your information and using that to sell it to an external third party. So it's never really free. And if you contribute, if you're thinking of contributing a couple bucks a month, becoming a premium member with Jason, I think that's money well spent. I can't imagine people feeling that they're not getting what they pay for there. And of course it helps to support your work. And I'm enthusiastic about you and your work. I think you're doing great stuff. I think you're talking about the things that I would like to see on my nightly news, but I know there's no chance I'm ever going to do that. So I know where to find it. I know where to get it. I know where to find you and the people that you bring on. And look, we don't have all the answers, of course. I mean, this is part of it, but this is part of the format of your show, which is let's talk about these things.
Right.
Somebody out there listening, it's going to trigger something. They're going to go, wait a second. I know about this guy. I've heard about this Eric Pianca UT. My daughter had a class, whatever. And somebody's going to bring more additional information to the party, and we're going to put this all together, and it's going to be helpful. And this is the future of news, and I think that you're on it.
Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate those kind words. And I want to make sure that people know the website, if you want to purchase the digital version of the book, which I definitely encourage people to do, it is theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. Go there and purchase Charlie's book. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to help support Charlie in the same way that he's describing that your sponsorship helps crowdsource the truth. And Charlie, you've hit on another important point. The viewer who contacted me and said, hey, wait a minute, my son or daughter went to Harvard and studied under that guy, and here's the effect. That's very helpful because it helps us to understand that what you're saying has been verified by another party who has firsthand experience. They're sharing their experience as a parent, something that you're going through. Obviously, your child is not in college yet, but this is something that's on your mind. I mean, I think back to when I was in college, and in some regards, it feels like yesterday. So I can imagine you look at your 9-year-old child, and a responsible parent is thinking about that future and what it's going to be like. So these are the types of thoughts and ideas that are helpful to be shared. People that want to come into the chat and share their opinion about something, that's not necessarily helpful. And if they're asked to stop and they persist, they're just disruptive and they're going to be removed. Some people have this bizarre idea that if they're sponsoring for $2 a month or $5 a month or $100 a month, that buys them the right to be disruptive or to do something that somebody who's not sponsoring at that level doesn't have the right to do. I fundamentally object to that, and actually I have fired sponsors who have insulted people in the comments of the sponsored shows saying, oh, you're probably a $2 sponsor. I abhor that, and that is elitism, and nobody is buying the right to insult me, to insult my viewers, to insult my guests, or to do anything disruptive at all. Another important key in this micro-sponsorship program, Charlie, I've spoken about it a lot. When I was doing, 3D productions, sometimes the budgets were very large. And this empowered the client to have a great deal of control over me and my company. I had a client in Dubai who decided they just didn't want to pay over $100,000, and it put me in a very bad condition. So when I was starting this company, I had a very clear thought in my mind that I would rather have 100,000 people giving me $2 than one person giving me 200,000. Because that's a democratization of the sponsorship, and it safeguards against the exact type of corruption in media that you're talking about. So I want to thank you, Charlie, for joining me in this effort. I want to have you back real soon. We're just about out of time. Do you have any closing words before we wrap up today?
It's our responsibility to be better about understanding what is going to be presented to us as mandatory moving forward. We need to dig into the backgrounds of the people that have been pushed onto the scene as saviors, like Bill Gates and Fauci. Before we just listen to who they are, before we listen to what they say, let's figure out who they are, because there's a lot of agendas going on here. There's a whole lot of money. We're at a disadvantage here because nobody's stepping forward and explaining what their plan really is. If it is to just make money off of the vaccines, okay, that's one thing. If it's to rewire your body through gene editing, listen, that's a totally different conversation that people need to have. And like you said, we're not scientists, we're not medical professionals here, but it doesn't preclude us from having the conversations about these sorts of things and inviting medical doctors that can bring in an area of expertise in this. Like you've had, I know you've talked to Dell about this before, and this is somebody that understands. He's not a doctor, but I mean, he understands this world better. So I encourage everybody to take this information, share it, because the algorithms will not. You'll get no help from big tech trying to get this message out there. And let's have the conversation. It's a difficult conversation to have, but it's much worse in the future if we never had this conversation and we take what is just imposed on us. That is a recipe for disaster. And so we're at a point right now, before anything has been made mandatory, that we can have the discussions and maybe stop it before it really harms us as a society.
I'm hopeful we can do that, and it's very well said, Charlie. I want to remind people to tune in to the Macroaggressions podcast with Charlie Robinson. Always good having you on the show, Charlie, and
Thanks, Jason.
Likewise appreciate what you're doing, and I hope that people will tune in to the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank the generous sponsors who make this and every other show that I do possible. One more thing I wanted to say, because you were talking about the election. This strike that came through yesterday was due to what YouTube has described as hate speech. There have been so many things going on behind the scenes that I haven't spoken about, and for strategic reasons, I don't want to speak about them. There are certainly times where talking about legal actions that people are attempting against me would potentially harm me to discuss them in public, so I'm not ready to talk about that yet. But there is so much going on right now that it's hard to imagine that it's coincidental. I'm very aware of the group of social engineers that have been surrounding me and the expanding group of social engineers that have been attacking me, Crowdsource the Truth, the guests that come on to Crowdsource the Truth for 3 years now. And they do a variety of things to discourage people like you, Charlie, from interacting with me, to discourage people from sponsoring the show. So the penalty for this alleged hate speech is supposed to be 1 week of no live streaming and no uploading to the Jason Goodman YouTube channel. This has dramatically reduced my reach. and it hurts my ability to gain new sponsors. But the most egregious thing is that when I entered into the appeal process, it says that this punishment will stay in place until November 3rd. You know what's happening November 3rd, Charlie?
Ooh, very interesting. Yeah, they don't want a whole lot of people talking about the other side of the coin here.
Right.
It's very devious, and yeah, and these video platforms, they give us so much great content, but boy, that authoritarian component to it is very alarming, and I don't appreciate that one bit, and I know you don't, and I know your fans don't. I mean, people just want to come in and see your show, and why you're punishing them? You're punishing the fans. It's not the YouTube is punishing the fans. I don't appreciate that. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
But you're resourceful, and you always seem to find a way around it. So
thank you. Yeah, and I mean, listen, just like the analogy that I made about the restaurant, YouTube owns this restaurant, and it's their right to tell me that they don't like what I'm talking about. I just want people to know that if they do value the guests, if they value the show, it's important for people to sponsor it, because we're going to need these alternative platforms. And anybody who says, oh, I'm not against you, but persists in disrupting the show and irritating me is not wanted here and should go away. They are working against the show, and they are not wanted. And I'm sorry to end on that note. So let's end on a positive note, Charlie. I'm hopeful that the work that you're doing and the information that's being brought forward here on Crowdsource the Truth and elsewhere can help us all gain an understanding of what's going on that will lead to a more positive outcome, because, as you pointed out, every day this is getting worse.
Yeah, it is. I'm a bit I'm concerned, but I try to stay optimistic, because as long as we're all still here breathing, we're talking about these things, there's still an opportunity for change. And the fact that they've felt the need to silence people on social media and silence them on video platforms is an acknowledgement that they are concerned about us as well. So if we weren't having an impact, they wouldn't be worried. They'd just steamroll over us. It's showing that we still have a little bit of we still have an impact. We still have a little bit of fight left in us, and now's the time. It's never been more important than now to get this information out there. It really is vital.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing. Charlie Robinson, author of The Octopus of Global Control and the Macroaggressions podcast. Great to have you on the show, Charlie. I will see you soon. Have a great day, everybody, and thanks for watching.